Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Can you wave if you can hear me? Great, thank you. So welcome to our Kol Nidre for the mind. My name is Elliot. I'm the newest rabbi here at Edith, the newest member of the clergy team as it grows. And I've been here about 6 or 7 weeks. It's been a strange time to begin my job here. I'm currently in the library, as you can see from the books behind me. Last time I was here teaching, someone said, "Oh, they've rearranged the books." And I didn't know. So Gail was laughing. I think it was Gail that had noticed that they rearranged the books. So welcome. This is the first session of 5 that are going to be running study sessions that are going to run through Yom Kippur over the next 24 hours. Just going to actually change my name so that everyone knows who I am. So the first of 5 sessions that are going to run over the next 24 hours of Yom Kippur, which are all going to focus on one of the lines from the Al-Chet. So the Al-Chet, which is also known as the Vidui Rabbah, the Great Confession. And the one that we're going to focus on this evening is Al-Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha, the sin that we have done before you in your presence, Bagalui Uvasater. Openly or in secret. And what's interesting about this one is that it doesn't appear like that in our mahzor. It appears separately. So we have one which is bagalui, openly in public, and the other uvasater, in secretly. But traditionally they come together in the traditional al-chet, the traditional confession. They're actually there in the same line together. So that's how I'm going to treat them today. But before we begin, let's say the blessing for Torah study together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So on the website, if you go back to where you got the link for here, there should be a handout. People can either have it on, either print it or have it on another device, or have it on the same screen, and we can flick backwards and forwards. I like being able to see people's faces, so I'm not going to screen share for the moment, unless someone desperately wants me to at some point, in which case wave and I might be able to point it out. But for the moment, I'm going to keep it on gallery view so that I can see as many people as possible. So because this is our first study session on the Al-Chet, on the Vidui Rabbah, I wanted to begin by thinking about what a chet actually is. Because we say that so many times, this word, Al-Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha. Does anyone know, has anyone learned about this before, about what a chet is, that can share? And you're able to unmute yourselves and just say, I'm not going to wait for hands up. Anyone? Nicholas is unmuted.
Have I unmuted? Ah, it was. Yes. Is it about an arrow missing its target?
That is very precisely what it is. That is the origin of a chet. The idea, this root, thank you, Nicholas, very much for pointing that out. So the root chet tet aleph is literally to miss a target or to miss a mark. That's the traditional meaning of it. If you look it up in a biblical Hebrew dictionary, that's what you'll find. But you'll also find sin, which we also that's how we're using it here in a way. But it's a particular type of sin. There are other words that we use about sin that will appear throughout our Yom Kippur liturgy. Pesha is another one. Avera is another one. Avon is another one. We hear the 3 that are mentioned in that very famous Adonai, Adonai song. It's not song, the bit that we sing from the Torah, which is Pesha, Avon, and Chet. And they all have slightly different meanings. But the point of the definition that Nicholas just gave us is that a chet is somehow, it's missing, it's not necessarily an intentional evil. And on your source sheet, you'll find under the question, what is a chet? You'll find this quotation from the book of Proverbs. So for those who don't know, the book of Proverbs is essentially a book of Proverbs. It's kind of, they follow each other. They're roughly thematic in parts, but sometimes they'll just follow each other as a random list of proverbs, of sayings that are sayings of wisdom. And Proverbs 19:2 says, a person without knowledge is no good. So there's often this repeating theme in Proverbs that wisdom is good and knowledge is good and skillfulness, being good at something or being knowledge about something is good. And one who makes haste, and the verb here is va'atz baraglayim, the one who kind of goes fast with their feet, hastens with their feet, will miss with their feet, choteh. The word choteh is the same root as the word chet. So when we are committing a chet, we're not necessarily thinking, I'm going to do something very horrible. We may even be trying to do something good, but we miss. We stumble. Maybe we're actually too quick to do something good. There's definitely times when I've been too quick to try and help somebody, when actually the best thing to do would be to either let them work something out for themselves or to give them the dignity of doing it for themselves. So a chet can be something which we have good intentions, but do something wrong. We may also have not so good intentions, or we may just be careless. That's another thing. It may just be something, a result of not really caring enough, not being careful enough. So that's a chet. And I think that's also important, therefore, for what comes next, because what I want to look at is, well, if we are talking about chets, if we're talking about things that, ways in which we missed the mark, ways in which we probably could have done better, but we weren't necessarily trying to do evil, is it better that we do them in secret or in public? Is it worse if we do them in secret or in public? I don't, and from what I've read in rabbinic literature, in stuff that the rabbis say in the Talmud, that we're mostly going to look at today, the rabbis don't seem to think this is just a list. It's not just, oh, the things we did publicly and the things we did privately, or the things we did in secret. There is actually a difference between the two. So doing a sin in public is actually, in some ways, for some rabbis of the Talmud, be worse than doing something in secret. And for others, vice versa. Doing something in secret is much worse than doing something in public. And one of the verses they keep coming back to, which is why I want to put it straight out there before we go into the Talmud, is a line from Psalms. And the psalm goes, it's to David, Psalm 32, and it's the very first verse. And it's one of the ones that's addressed to David. Now, David is often used as an example in the Torah of someone who sins, because he's often not the most moral person in the world. We know, for many people know that David was desperate to build the temple, that God had kind of said that God was going to build a temple, or God was going to get the Jewish people to build a temple in Jerusalem. And David was desperate to be that person, but God said, no, you've just got too much blood on your hands. You've just done too many things wrong. And so God waited until David's son, Solomon, was the king, and Solomon was the one who was able to build the temple. If anyone has any questions at any point, feel free to unmute yourselves or wave at me. I'll try and I think I can see everybody, which is great, because sometimes on Zoom you can't see everybody. But if anyone has a question or a comment or something that they think that sounds weird, feel free to just jump in and don't stand on ceremony, even on Kol Nidre. So this verse says, to David, a maskil. And maskil is something to do with education. It's something to do with a maskil is a teacher, perhaps. It's something to do with this. The root sachal is to do with sight, being able to see things. If you go to, in modern Hebrew, if you go to Israel, you histakel et televisia. Televisia, sorry. So you actually, you look into TV, you learn from it, you're viewing it. It's kind of a reflexive activity of watching. Ashrei Nesui Pesha. So happy, Ashrei, is the one whose transgression, Pesha, we have that word which I just mentioned, Kasui, his transgression is forgiven. Nesui, so Nesui, who's forgiven, Kasui Chatata, whose sin is hidden. Kasui, means to cover over, so to be covered over. So the chet, the chata'ah, the sinning, the act of sinning, is covered over. So happy is that person whose sin is covered over. And the rabbis find this very, very important. And they use it in a number of different contexts. I wonder if I could volunteer anybody to read at this point. So we're coming now to the Babylonian Talmud, Yoma, the tractate of Yoma. The tractate is not a code of Jewish law, but a kind of collection of Jewish laws and stories that was probably finished around 600 to 700 CE of the common, 600 to 700 of the Common Era. And it's divided into tractates that are based on theme. And the one that we're going to begin with this evening is Yoma 86b. So the 86b refers to the page number. Yoma means literally in Aramaic, it means the day. And the rabbis understand the day as being the day of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day. No other day gets that title of just being the day, and you know what it means. So we're going to read a bit from that. You've got on your page the Hebrew, Aramaic, and you've also got the English. I wonder if Kerry, since you have a wonderful backdrop of Eilith as your background, I wonder whether you might be able to read for us the first few paragraphs there. In fact, I might stop you each paragraph so we can really work out what's going on, and maybe, because some of the people we're going to read about we may not have heard of, so it'd be great to just be able to pause maybe at the end of each paragraph to discuss. But I'm going to nominate you as our reader until the bottom of the page, if that's all right.
Excellent. Nomination accepted.
Thank you.
It is necessary to detail the sin, as it is written, "Please, this people have sinned a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold." These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava.
Thank you very much. So we've got this opening statement saying it is necessary to detail the sin, which I think goes back to this question of, should sins be hidden, or should they be in public? Should they be revealed to everybody? Galui is also the thing that we do when we uncover the Torah scroll. When the kids come up or the adults come up and uncover the Torah scroll. So should the sins we do be hidden or revealed? And this is dealing with a particular context in which they might be hidden or revealed, and that's in confession. Should we tell people what we've done wrong? Or should that be something which we can be sorry for? Can we repent for it, even if no one else knows about it? And according to this particular opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who was a 2nd century rabbi, so operating around the time of the second Jewish revolt. So after the temple has been destroyed, but before or during the time in which there was the second uprising, people may have heard of Bar Kokhba, the Bar Kokhba rebellion. He was at that time. And he said that you should tell people, you should in public say what your sin was, or you should publicly sin. It's better to sin in public so people to know what your sin is. And he uses this text from Exodus 32:31. And the context of this is Moses speaking. Please, this people have sinned a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold. The context of this is, people may have already guessed, the construction of the golden calf in Exodus chapter 31, 32. Moses is up on the mountain, the people are waiting for Moses to come down, and as they're waiting, they get frustrated and they say, let's build a god of gold that we can worship, because Moses just left us in the middle of nowhere and we need a god to pray to. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava uses this as a proof text, as a proof that we should say what the sin was. So I should be able to tell you, oh, this person did this thing and that person did the other thing, because Moses said, oh, look, the people made a golden calf. He doesn't just say the people sinned. He says specifically what they did. Perhaps also interesting for the context is Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was also known, his nickname, if you like, was the Chassid, the righteous person. His nickname was that he was this very righteous person. So maybe he was okay with of people knowing what his sins were, because there weren't very many of them. So he was very righteous. So he thought, well, I'm okay Even if they say, oh, he left the toilet seat up one time or something like that, it's like, it doesn't matter. But there'll be other people who he wants to know what their sin is because he's very righteous. He wants to know that he's more righteous than everybody else. He also, in rabbinic times, there often were rabbis who had not enemies, but they were frenemies, if you like, friend enemies, where you would have one rabbi and one rabbi who would say one thing and another rabbi, usually the same person, who would always disagree with them. We have the most famous example probably is Hillel and Shammai, right? The house of Hillel said one thing, but the house of Shammai said something else. And you always get the same pair, and they're called the pairs, the Zugim, the great ones of their generation. And there are two of them. And the one who was always disagreeing with Rabbi Yehuda was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, who's probably more famous. Rabbi Akiva, who in fact was, we will read about tomorrow in our martyrology service, was executed for teaching the Torah in public when it was forbidden. So he is very much attached to doing things in public. But he says, in the next paragraph, which Kerry's about to read for us,
happy is one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is hidden.
Thank you. So he just quotes from the Psalm. He says, no, it's much better that we hide sins. People don't need to know what you've done wrong. It's for you to know what you've done wrong. And Rabbi Yehuda the Hasid, who's very, very righteous, can just be assured that he himself is righteous, not to know what all the other sins of everyone else has done. So we've got these two proof texts, one from Exodus, one Moses, which is a pretty strong one, right? Moses saying that the people made this golden calf, not just saying, oh, the people, they were bad. He said the people made this golden calf, they did something terribly wrong when they did that particular thing. And Rabbi Akiva, and then the Psalm saying, no, it's better to not know what people did wrong. So the Talmud can't just, sometimes it might leave these two opinions like that, but now it wants to go a bit further and interrogate it a bit more and say, well, who's right? Which one is right? Who's the correct person here? So, Kerry, would you mind finishing? Actually, could you just go to the end of the page?
Yes, just the last paragraph on the page.
Yeah, so from why did Moses say up to the end?
But why did Moses say, and they have made for themselves a god of gold? It is as Rabbi Yanai says. Rabbi Yanai said, Moses said before the Holy Blessed One, blessed is God, sovereign of the universe. It is the silver and gold that you gave to Israel in abundance until they said enough, which caused them to make a god of gold.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So the Talmud wants to understand, well, okay, but why does Moses detail the sin? What is actually going on here? Because it doesn't really like the idea that we don't know which one's better. Is it better to have your sins known or to not known? So it's actually trying to resolve it. And it says, well, so why did Moses say this? Why didn't Moses just say, they've sinned a great sin, full stop? Well, the reason it says, Rabbi Yanai says, that Moses, and he does here what we call a midrash, right? He does an explanation. He invents something, or maybe it's something he inherited as a tradition from one of his teachers that explains a gap in the Torah, explains a hole of knowledge, something we don't know. He fills in that gap, and he says that what Moses said was, "Blessed are you, God, sovereign of the universe. It is the silver and gold that you gave to Israel in abundance until they said enough." And the context of that is that when the people of Israel left Egypt, they were allowed to loot and take all the gold they possibly could from the slavers, the slave owners, and take it away with them. And so, in fact, Moses, in some ways, it's very cheeky of Moses. He's turning it back on God and saying, "Well, what do you expect? Of course, they made a god of gold. You gave them so much gold. What were they going to do with it all?" And so what the Talmud is saying here, it doesn't say it explicitly, but I think what it's saying is that Moses wasn't so much saying they did that particular sin, look, aren't they awful? He'd already said that they sinned. He didn't need to say that they'd done a sin, what the particular sin was. According to the Talmud, he was actually explaining it. He was saying, this is why they've done it. And pointing out to God, you gave them all this silver and gold, they were going to do something with it. So what it seems to be suggesting is that Rabbi Akiva is the one who's right. and that the psalm, which says that it's better, happy is the one whose sin is hidden, is kasui, is actually correct. It's the thing we should rely on. Not that Moses said the people had sinned with it by making a god of gold. That's a different there's a different explanation for why that was. The real lesson we should be learning is from the psalm, that it's better to keep our sins quiet. Not that we shouldn't repent for them, not that we shouldn't confess them inside or to God, or in fact, perhaps to the person we did it to, but that we shouldn't make it public. We shouldn't put it out there in the public sphere. On the next page, we have a very short quote from another tractate of the Babylonian Talmud, this time from tractate Brachot. Brachot dealing with blessings. And here we have again this psalm. The psalm is quoted again. And this time we have a different rabbi, Rav Kahana, who says, I find impudent someone who specifies their sin. As it is written, happy is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is hidden. So Rav Kahana clearly thinks it's a bit inappropriate, actually, for you to get up on the bima or get up in shul and say, I did this thing, aren't I terrible? And he said you shouldn't do it. So that's a small little quotation from Talmud Brachot. But so far, we're getting a fairly good picture that's telling us that you shouldn't publicize what you've done wrong. You should try and you should confess it, but you shouldn't say it out loud in public. That's what we're being told in the Talmud. The next source we come to is quite a long one. It goes over 2 pages. It's a long discussion. It's a longer discussion of the question, not so much of whether you should tell people your sin in public, your chet in public, or keep it a secret. It's all about whether you should do it in public or do it in secret. Kiddushin, this is from Kiddushin 40a, is mostly concerned with the question of marriage. Kiddushin being the Jewish wedding ceremony, but the Talmud and the Mishnah go off in all kinds of different directions, which we might not expect. It doesn't stay on topic the same way that a modern PhD, like philosophy PhD, will stay on topic. It kind of goes off in different directions. And the Mishnah from which this is drawn in this Talmud is actually a Talmud that talks about the power of one mitzvah leading to another mitzvah, and one sin leading to another sin. So there is a connection there between the source material in the Mishnah, which this is commenting on, but it is kind of not on the topic of weddings as such. Although, interestingly, this is a bit of a slide, but there is a whole question about why men should get married and when they should get married. And in the Talmud, there's a big concern that if men don't get married early enough, then they'll fall into sexual they'll fall into sexual sin in whatever way whether they're going to sex workers or whatever. It's important for many rabbis in the Talmud that men get married early so they're not led astray. And in fact, or chet, they will led to a chet, perhaps the way we defined it. So that's why it's important to get married. So although we may not see much of a connection between marriage and sin, the question of sin in that way, I think that the rabbis that is going through their mind. They're kind of thinking about marriage as a way of preventing sin in some way. So, but this is almost a separate discussion from marriage. This is about the question of whether you should commit a sin in secret or in public. Who else is on my screen? Have you got any volunteers to read? Anyone want to wave at me? Great, thank you. Sanford, is that your name? Great, Sanford, thank you for volunteering. But you're muted.
Sorry, it turns out that when you're using the online interface and then you hit space, the reading goes flying up the screen. So it's been fun chasing it. Sorry. Rabbi Abahu said in the name of the rabbi Chaina, it is better. You've got it. It is better for a person to commit a sin in secret and thereby not desecrate the name of heaven in public, as it is written. And you, house of Israel, Thus says the Eternal, each man go serve his idols, and since you do not listen to me and desecrate my holy name.
Thank you very much. We'll stop there. Can I call on you to read the rest of the bits from this passage? Is that okay?
Sure, that's
Great,
fine.
thank you. Thanks. So here we have two rabbis, Rabbi Abahu, who were both of whom lived in the land of Israel in the 2nd century of the Common Era. Rabbi Abahu was famous for living in a place called Caesarea or Caesarea. People may have been there. It's where Benjamin Netanyahu now lives. It's a very rich part of Israel. And it was also where it was essentially a Roman settlement, but he was very famous for kind of being someone who could go and speak to the Romans and kind of interact with them and kind of speak on behalf of the Jews in the land of Israel. And one of his forebears was Rabbi Hanina. And I don't know if many people were here for the session that I did at Rosh Hashanah, where we read about the execution of Rabbi Hanina, which is going to come perhaps into to be important here. So Rabbi Hanina said, and then Rabbi Abahu is reminding us that he said, it's better for a person to commit a sin in secret, because if you commit a sin in public, then you're not just committing a sin in public, you are desecrating the name of heaven. As it is written, so he quotes here from the prophet Ezekiel, that by doing these things, you're desecrating God's name. So it's one thing to do something in private where you're just kind of, only you know that you've done it, and doing something in public where essentially you're not just doing something, stealing a diamond ring, you're stealing a diamond ring, but you're also desecrating the name of heaven, because you're somehow saying that you're somehow desecrating God's name. On the next page, you have the Rashi's commentary. So Rashi was a medieval commentator who lived in medieval France. And basically, if you're studying Talmud, say in yeshiva, today, you would only ever do so, in fact, also the Torah as well. You're only ever going to do so through the eyes of Rashi. You're always going to have Rashi with you to explain what some of it means. And Rashi on this line makes it very clear. He says, if you've got page 3, it's at the very top of page 3. And what he does is, the bit that's underlined is the bit that he's commenting on, and the rest of it is Rashi's commentary. So he says, the one who sees the sin will treat lightly the honor of the omnipresent. So if I do something, and the omnipresent being a name for God, Hamakom, we may have heard God being described as Hamakom, literally the place, but it means every place, like the place as in the whole thing. So he says, what Rashi is saying to us is that the one who sees a sin, if I stole something or I hurt somebody or whatever, in public, someone else might see it and say, oh, that person clearly doesn't fear God, right? That person clearly doesn't fear the consequence of their actions. And they'll treat it very lightly. They'll treat God very lightly, because why would I bother? If that person can just go and do this so publicly and freely, why would I bother being fearful of the consequences of sin? So that's Rashi's explanation, is that when we sin in public, according to Ezekiel and according to Rabbi Hanina, we are somehow causing people to doubt or causing people to take lightly their moral obligations. Does anyone know, this is not a test, of people that came to my Rosh Hashanah session, but Rabbi Hanina died for a very particular reason, and it's described in detail in the Talmud as to what it was that he did. So there were 2 reasons given, but they come from different places. So the first reason that's given for Rabbi Hanina's execution by the Romans was that he taught Torah in public, right? Rabbi Akiva did the same thing, right? Rabbi Hanina was didn't follow the Romans' guidance in teaching in public. But of course, that's the Romans' reason for killing him. But of course, in the rabbinic imagination, or in the rabbinic mind, God causes death. God's the one who passed the sentence on Rabbi Hanina, not the Romans. If God had wanted to save Rabbi Hanina, then God would have saved Rabbi Hanina. The thing that, according to the Talmud, Rabbi Hanina was really sentenced for was the fact that he said the name of God in public. he pronounced the Tetragrammaton, Yud Hey Vav Hey, said it in public. And that was the thing that that's really interesting, therefore, that he says it's much better to do things in private, right? Maybe he's learned the lesson. It's not clear in the Talmud whether in the narrative, whether he actually does know that that's why he was executed, but it's very interesting that it's him that is saying these words in the Talmud. It's clearly very much linked to the explanation for his death in the Talmud. Sanford, would you mind continuing to read?
Rabbi Eli,
yeah.
the elder said, if a person sees that their evil inclination is overcoming them, they should go to a place where nobody knows them, and they should wear black and cover themselves in black, and they should do as is pleasing to them and not desecrate the name of heaven in public.
Thank you very much. Now, this is pretty shocking, right? I was pretty shocked when I read this, when I first discovered this. Rabbi Eli, a rabbi, is telling me that if I have to do something bad, I should just go somewhere where nobody knows me and do it. It seems really, really weird, right? Rabbi Eli, interestingly, is not someone we hear very much from in the Talmud, unlike the rabbis we've had so far, who are pretty famous. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Abahu, Rabbi Chanina. He's not a very well-known sage. Like, he's not quoted very much. But the fact that he was quoted saying this, I think, is really interesting. So he's saying, if you can't stop yourself from doing something sinful, then you should go and wear black, cover yourself in like almost shroud yourself, right? Kind of cover yourself. I think of Harry Potter, right, and the invisibility cloak, and you kind of becoming completely black. And they should do as is pleasing to them and not desecrate the name of heaven in public. So you shouldn't be known to be doing things. Better not to be known than to not do it at all. I suppose that's the point they're saying, right? Is if you're going to do it, you might as well do it in secret. Again, Rashi has something to say about this, and he comments particularly on the idea of dressing in black. So again, at the top of page 3, he says they should wear black so they don't see themselves with honor, right? So black is something which perhaps is you're humbling yourself by wearing black. So when you think about what you're doing, you're not necessarily thinking very good things about yourself. And he says it might actually stop them from singing. So just by putting on the black clothing, and you think, oh, actually, I don't want to do that. So similarly, we might think in those terms as well, even if we're thinking about it differently, we might think it's like taking that first step to doing something. If we know that by doing that, we're somehow putting ourselves in a place of sin, we might already rethink it. Or we might already start thinking about, that's something I shouldn't do. I'm about to do something I shouldn't do, and I'm not going to think very well of myself when I finish doing this, so I'm not going to do it. And then he goes on saying that even if they do sin, there won't be anyone who's paying attention to them, and therefore they should wear black. So the idea being that if no one's going to see you, then it's in some way it's better than if people don't see you. Sanford, do you mind continuing reading? Is it really so?
Is it really so? Was it not taught in a Mishnah? Anyone who does not have consideration for the honor of their maker, it would have been better for them not to come into the world. Who is that? Rabbah says, this is one who looks at a rainbow. Rav Yosef says, this is one who sins in secret.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So the Talmud has, it quotes these rabbis. So we've heard a few different rabbis being quoted, but it also has its own voice. We call it the stama voice, the kind of the silent voice, the voice that we don't know who it is, the anonymous voice of the Talmud, probably the last historical layer. So once it was being finalized, they added in this kind of anonymous layer asking these kind of questions. Really? Did Rabbi Eli really say that? And that's the reaction I had, right? And many other people would have had, like, really? He just said you should actually do it, but just dress up in a different costume and go somewhere else to do it? He says, is it not taught in the Mishnah that anyone who does not consideration for the honor of their maker, i.e. that anyone who doesn't honor God, it would have been better for them not to come into the world? And then it asks, well, who is that person? So this is still this kind of anonymous person commenting on this quotation, much older quotation, saying, who is that? Who is the person who doesn't show honor to their maker? And the first answer to this question is very, very strange. Rabbah, who was a 3rd century Babylonian sage, says, it's one who looks at a rainbow. I mean, who of us hasn't looked at a rainbow? I mean, it's just crazy. It's almost as crazy as what's come before. Rabbah says one who looks at a rainbow. Now, I did some digging on this one, and what it seems to be is that Rabbah is commenting on a verse from the prophet Ezekiel. Interestingly, we had Ezekiel just now, which seems to equate the rainbow with the rays of God, the rays of perhaps Shekhinah. We also know that when traditionally, when the priests were doing their blessing, when they stand at the front of the synagogue and do that and bless the congregation, that you were supposed to hide your eyes, right? You weren't supposed to look at the priest when they did that. And you have like stories of children who kind of hide under their parents' talit and not wanting to see, because the Shekhinah, the presence of God, is supposed to be hovering above the congregation and shouldn't be seen, right? The passage that we read tomorrow afternoon, I think, in our Yom Kippur services is that scene where Moses wants to see God, and God says, no, you can't see me and live. No one can see me and live. And so Moses gets to see God's back, but God basically kind of covers over Moses' eyes so that Moses can't see God. So there is this idea, perhaps Rabbi is picking up on this idea that that looking at a rainbow is almost like looking at the Shekhinah, almost like looking at God, and no one can look at God. Nicholas, you're waving.
Yes. Does the rainbow here have a link with the rainbow in the flood story with the covenant of the eternal?
That's a really good question. I have no idea. That's what I thought as well originally. I was like, well, but then why? And it even says in the Torah, because so this is clear. This is like this is doubly strange, because actually it says in the Torah, when you see a rainbow, you will be reminded of the covenant that God has made, that God won't destroy the world again. That's what it means in the Noah story. So I think there's clearly something going. It may be that interesting, the word used, the verb is so interesting. It's the same word as was used in the Psalm, lehistakel, rather than so it's to kind of contemplate maybe, or to think that it has some kind of deeper meaning. Whereas simply if it was just ro'eh, just sees a rainbow, it might be different, if that makes sense. So I think it may be the act of looking, rather than that you're looking at a rainbow, that is perhaps a bit different. So that lehistakel is different from lirot. So just to observe or to contemplate, to try and look into, is different from just seeing it, maybe. But it's pretty strange. And that's probably why the Talmud doesn't like this one. And it goes on to the next one, which is Rav Yosef saying, this is one who sins in secret, which I think is a much more sensible answer to that question. Who is the person who does not have consideration for the honor of their maker? And that's the person who sins in secret. So the Talmud seems to be coming down on the side that the worst thing you can do is to sin in secret. Even though Rabbi Eli says the best thing to do is to sin not in public. To not, Gail.
So Elliot, I'm thinking that there's several ways of sinning, and the one we've looked at so far is an active an action, an external action. We haven't looked at the sins that are thinking in the head. So you can smite someone and think something horrible, or that's when, and then go and act on something horrible, so that you get those sayings, your actions speak louder than words or something. But so the sins of thinking haven't appeared here. Are they going to come?
Well, I think they are going to come. So, for example, tomorrow, Rabbi Josh is going to talk about kalot rosh, the idea of being frivolous. And that's this kind of sin, that having fun is a sin. But what I think is interesting here is that if you sin in your head, it's almost by definition, it's secret. The only way it can become public is if you do an action. So the whole basis, I suppose, of my session is bagaluyu vasater, is that it has to be an action, because if it's just a thought, even once you've spoken it, it's an action, right? If I said something, if I did lashon hara, if I said something nasty about somebody, it's already an action. I mean, and I could either do it to one person aside, like just in my flat at home, or I could do it on a Zoom call with the whole synagogue, or on the bima. So there is so that's the difference. If I think it in my head, it's just automatically secret. So we've got about 15 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get through all the sources. So Sanford, you've got one more line of this Talmud, because it doesn't even like that explanation. We've still got these two sides that haven't quite been resolved yet.
There is no difficulty. This one for those who are able to bend, i.e. control their inclination, and this one for those who are unable to bend their inclination.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your reading. So this, the Aramaic here is lo kasha, and it's used a lot in the Talmud when there's a problem. A kasha is a problem. So it says lo kasha. There's not a problem. There's not a difficulty here. Possibly related to the word kasha. People might make kasher. So that means kasher. It's really hard, difficult. So lo kasha. It says there's not a problem. This one, as in the one we've just mentioned, that the sitting in secret is the worst thing you could do. It's for one who's able to control their inclination. So if someone's able to control it, if I'm able to say, actually, I don't need to say something nasty about you. I don't need to say something nasty about that person at all. Then it's actually worse. If I was able to control it and just decided that I would in that moment, and then it would be better for me. Then it actually doesn't matter. Then it's worse to do it in secret. Whereas if I was unable to control it, I just had to tell somebody, or I had to do something horrible, it's better to do it in secret. So that's the difference. So both of these ideas are correct. There are some situations in which it's better to do things in public, and there's some situations in which it's better to do things in secret, depending on how you are able to control your own inclinations. So does that make sense? So if you're able to control your inclinations, then you shouldn't do it at all. But it's even worse if you do it in secret. If you're unable to control your inclinations, then it's actually much worse to do it in public. And you should be able to do it in secret at a very last resort. So that's what the Talmud has to say, all the things I found. I'm sure there are many other things the Talmud says about sinning in public and sinning secretly, but those are things that I found in the Talmud. So we looked at those three tractates, and we looked at a little bit of Rashi on Kiddushin. So the next bit I want to look at is this question that continues about, do I tell people that I've done it? Do I confess in public that I've done a particular sin? And that's where we come to the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, which is about a good 1,000 years later after the Talmud. It's a Jewish legal code that was written by the Sephardi scholar Joseph Caro. And then for every single, well, not for every single one, but for many of the bullet points that he kind of writes in bullet points, right? It's a huge legal code. Unlike the Talmud, which, as I said, can kind of go in all kinds of different directions. You know, you're talking about the laws of marriage, then you go into a discussion about whether you should sin in private or in public, and then they'll tell a story about a particular rabbi that did X, Y, and Z. The legal codes are much more rigid, and they also don't contain the same kind of discussions that the Talmud does. The Talmud will conclude, as we've seen, lots of differing opinions, and sometimes it doesn't even tell you what kind of the right opinion is, and tell you what the one we follow is. But the Shulchan Aruch and the legal codes that are like it, they are much more like, no, you do this, 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 and this. But there is a difference. It does acknowledge there's a difference in minhagim between Sephardi and Ashkenazi. So the bullet points of Joseph Caro are the Sephardi laws. And then Moses Isserlis came along and wrote in additions to almost every single point, detailing how the Ashkenazi practice was slightly different from the Sephardi one. So we begin with Caro saying, it is not necessary to specify the sin, but if one wants to specify it, they can. And if he confesses it in a whisper, it is right to specify the sin. So Caro says, if you really want to tell people what you did wrong, If you want to, in public, when you're standing up, beating your chest on Yom Kippur, and say, I did this terrible thing, then you can, but you don't have to do it. Like, no one's obligated to specify their sin in public. If the confession is happening in a whisper, if you're kind of just standing in the corner on your own praying to God, and you're confessing, then you can say it, but you shouldn't say it. It seems to suggest that you shouldn't say it loud enough that other people will hear, i.e. it's not to be known about in public. And I also think this may come down to the same thing that Talmud was talking about, that if you're saying all these things you've done wrong, people might go, well, that guy, if you did all those things wrong, why should I worry about anything? Why should I worry about God, what God says? Why should I worry about morality? Might be like we talk about bad examples, like setting a bad example. Isilis adds, the Ashkenazi authority adds, but if one prays with a loud voice, or if one is the prayer leader who repeats the prayer, one should not specify the sin. So if you are praying very loudly, if you're we go, oh, I did so terribly wrong, and if you are the person who's standing at the front of the congregation leading everybody, then you should not specify. So if you're the one leading Badui, you shouldn't say in the front of everybody what you've done wrong, the specifics of what you've done wrong. You shouldn't make those things public. What's really interesting, we're going to come on now to a quotation from Rabbi Aaron Pankin, who people may have heard of for a very sad reason. He was he was the president of Hebrew Union College, and in 2018, he was literally due to ordain a whole class of students and died in an accident the day before the ordination. It was a very dramatic and very sad day. But he was a teacher of rabbinic literature and of liturgy, and people that were taught by him speak so highly of him, particularly after he died. And he wrote this essay, which was about al-chetz, sinning in secret, whether we should, what the prayer is getting at, should we actually be telling people what our sins are? And he talks about that historically, when we were confessing, the idea was actually to confess for what you'd done in the temple. You would say what you'd done, the particular thing that you'd done, and give your sacrifice. That when you gave your sacrifice, and there were different sacrifices for different kinds of sins. So those who were at the session that Rabbi Hannah and I did on when you're fasting or not, if anyone was there, we talked about, if you eat accidentally on Yom Kippur, there's a certain offering you're supposed to bring to the temple. If you drink accidentally, or you do some work accidentally on Yom Kippur, there's a certain, according to the Talmud anyway, there's all kinds of reasons why we might eat now, particularly when we're in the same room when we're doing Yom Kippur in the same room as our fridge. But there's all kinds of different things which you bring a particular kind of offering for in the Talmud. So he says that was the practice, and then he talks about how that changed from being someone saying specifically what they'd done wrong in the temple to a collective confession where we all say the same things. We all say the al-chet, regardless of whether we think we've done those things. We say we have done all these things. Whether we say ashamnu, where we beat the chest, ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu, it's an acrostic. It's literally the aleph to taf, the A to Z of sin, and we say we did all of them: the killing, the stealing, all the things that I didn't kill anybody this year, but we say all these things because we are doing it as a community and not as individuals. But of course, also it allows us to say things that we did without necessarily saying I did that thing, because we're all saying it, so we all kind of in some way are able to say it and know that we did it, even if other people don't know. Of course, the other thing that yes, sorry, I'm not quite sure your name. You need to unmute. Sorry, I'm gonna unmute for you, and then you can just click OK. Oh.
Okay.
There you go. There you are.
I was just going to say that doesn't that link with what Gail was saying, that whilst we're doing the communal confession, the hidden ones that we keep in our minds, we're allowed to think about.
Oh, absolutely, yes. But so the ones that yeah, but I think what Gail was talking about were sins that we do by thinking things. So thinking nasty things about people, even if, in a certain sense, being hypocritical, and kind of saying one thing to somebody but thinking something else. So that's absolutely included in the sins we do in secret. But there may be other sins we do in secret that maybe one person knows about or two people know about, but the public don't know, like the whole community doesn't know. And that also fits into that. So yes, absolutely, that's under that umbrella, but it's not the only thing that it's talking about. Does that make sense? Gail, are you going to come in on that?
Can I just add something? I'm interested what Sandra also thinks of this is, do you think this is why psychoanalysis was so successful? So that you could actually tell your sins and all your thoughts and even your actions to, thought you'd like that, Sandra. So you could, who's going to punish you within the secret haven of analysis?
Yeah, but of course
They'll
that
say
potentially
that because
also.
I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist.
Okay, but do you think that could also have replaced the confessional, like the priest confessional in the church as well?
Same thing.
Yeah, but we don't necessarily
No, I
have
don't
that.
think so.
We have a tradition in Judaism of deathbed confession, but not necessarily of going to a rabbi and confessing your sins in that way, or going to a priest in some way. But I think originally we did, like that's what Aaron Pankin is talking about, that originally it was the priest, but it was in public. So you actually say to the priest, this is what I did, and here's the dove that you can now sacrifice so that I don't feel that guilt anymore. We also had the idea of the scapegoat, right? You put your sins onto the scapegoat. That is a kind of public, and maybe you could even say, that's the sin that I'm putting onto the scapegoat when you did it. We've only got about 2 more minutes, so I'm just going to read very quickly what Rabbi Pankin has to say, and then I'm going to make one final point. And then we are going to go back to the heart, or I can't send you back, but I'm going to encourage you to go back to the heart service for for the continuation of the service and for Rabbi Hannah's sermon. But Rabbi Pankin says, Jews have moved from enumerating aloud our own personally relevant sins to reciting fixed lists of sins as part of a communal liturgy, and only then adding the personal details quietly and thus privately. The benefits inherent in this transition are legion. First off, because no one hears the specific confessions of others. Individuals may pray without fear of shame, anger, or reprisal. Secondly, the seemingly endless collection of sins recited is sure to include sins one has committed and forgotten, holding up a critical mirror that reminds us to search ourselves carefully for those sins that might easily slip our minds. In the public listing of sins, strangely enough, there is companionship for sinners and privacy for penitents. In all, sorry, that shouldn't be I, that should just be all of us. All of us sin, and all of us recite these lists. Then all of us are part of one common community seeking repentance. We confess as part of that community, but not, thankfully, at the cost of exposing details of our own exacting and embarrassing list of sins. The Yom Kippur confessions operate within this liminal space between public and private. So he's making another point there, which I think is very, very interesting, which is that if we just said all the things that we'd done, or we'd only ever say the things that we thought we had done, or the things that we remember we did. I can't remember all the things, all the mistakes, all the things like all the chets I did back in October 2019. But by listing all the ones that we can think of in the Al-Chet and the Ashamnu, we might actually remind ourselves of the ones we've forgotten, the ones that were secret from ourselves. And that brings me to this final idea of, well, what if the sins are not just secret to other people or to the public? What if those sins are actually secret to ourselves as well? And that's where I come to Rabbi J. Henry Moses on the very last part of the handout, who works for the Wexner Foundation of Jewish Education. I couldn't find much else about him in terms of his life story, but he is someone who is alive today. So he says, the vidui, the confession, is meant to awaken the recognition that somewhere among the tangle of our actions, motivations, and words are the secrets we are keeping from ourselves. This is the point of the comprehensive acrostics, the vidui, the Al-Chet and the Ashamnu, the Aleph to Taf listings in both Ashamnu and Al-Chet, an effort apparently to capture every nuance of transgression. Here I am, we are saying, a faint image of God, part of a species that falls short of our potential in innumerable ways. let me enumerate them anyway, and in so doing construct a mirror, a sounding board that may reflect back at me a faint echo of my own deepest and most hidden flaws. I turn to you, knower of secrets, revealer of secrets, that by opening my heart to you, I may come to know the depths of my own being. So on that note, I send you back into the heart service, into Yom Kippur, into potentially also the doing and confession, and hopefully this has been
I'm wondering if he timed out exactly at the right time.
Yeah,
the
it's a
questions that are
sign.
being raised by our questions on where to go next. Let me just.
You ended up having a minor brief pause, and we all were sitting here thinking that maybe it was God's.
It was very
Maybe it was
reflective.
Hashem saying it's time to get our butt over to the other one.
I'm going to share a screen so that everyone can see. There we go. But people, feel free to stay if you want to. Discuss anymore.
If you want, get the URL and you can put it in the chat, and everybody else could see it because you have the ability to chat, and then
do we
people
have
can
the
click.
ability to chat?
You should, not us, but we should be able to see what you post. I think.
Okay, let me just have a look. That's if I can find it.
Thank you very much, though.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you. That was great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Toda rabah.
And we'll just click in ourselves to
See you around.
Good evening.
Pray with the high holidays.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm kind of curious about the fact that, like, as a community, we're not so like one that's going out there and preaching ideas, but we seem to be really caught up in public displays of sin and the fear of the repercussions of that. And I don't know if that's like, that kind of surprised me a little bit, that everyone's so scared, not so much of the sin, but the effects of said sin, and that how that might affect people's beliefs and make them question, which is something that I found within Judaism, is people are always questioning, and that's the point. And by hiding these sins, it's trying to prevent people questioning their belief in God. But the sins are still happening. So therefore, I don't, as a leader, I'm kind of being like, from that position of asking people to not share their sins for the fear of that repercussion. Why is it that they themselves are not questioning, well, we know that these people have said, or we don't, but we're preventing questioning this? I don't know if that really made sense.
Yeah, so are you saying that actually by singing in public, we're actually, or not by not singing in public, we're denying people the opportunity to actually rethink it through?
Well, no, but this, it said this fear of, we don't want people to, well, if you're sinning and there aren't these repercussions, or people are sinning, why is it that, and God isn't doing something about this? Oh, wait a minute, why shouldn't I just go and do this?
Yeah.
Which I'm questioning, well, why are we scared of that? And why are we trying to get people to hide the fact, to sin, to not sin in public if they must sin, because of the fear of how others may see it, and then question their own beliefs.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a problem for the rabbis. I'm not sure that it's a problem for us. I'm not sure that we're the same. I'm not sure that we have the same anxieties that the rabbis had.
Yeah, I hope, but it just makes me, it then, as rabbis, surely they do, and I believe they do have a very strong belief. So why is it that they're scared, like this fear? It seems a bit grounded on fear, which is a surprise.
Yeah, I agree. They often were quite scared people. They did fear things quite, and they were, remember also they were living in a time where the rabbis we're talking about, a lot of them were living under persecution.
Yeah, I was thinking
There was a good
of that.
reason to be very scared about what you did in public. And you wanted, as I said, the fact that a number of the rabbis we talked about were executed in public for doing things that they, were actually very normal things, like teaching Torah. We don't thankfully live in that kind of world. So I can understand to a certain extent why they were so scared. And in some ways, the only thing that was holding them together was this belief and this faith in God. They didn't have anything else to protect them because they were so persecuted, if that makes sense.
But then I can't deny that we do still somewhat live in this world where we have a fear of the outside eye.
Also true.
Of
which we've inherited, I think, partly from them.
Yeah.
Partly from these texts. We've inherited from them and from, the people that lived in medieval times who were also persecuted, and the people that lived in the 20th century who were also persecuted. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That probably doesn't help, but I think that
it's just good to question it out loud.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave that up there for the moment, but actually, if everyone knows, there are still a few people on the call, I think. But I'm going to end the meeting, so you can head back to this website and find yourself your way back to the heart service for Rabbi Hannah's sermon. Gemar Chatima Torah.